Xenoblade Chronicles 3 is coming this year. That still feels like a surreal statement to be saying, let alone how surreal actually seeing the game in action was. I would hope that everybody watching this video has seen it, but if this is somehow your first time hearing about this, at the end of that stellar Nintendo Direct we got recently, we got an extremely tantalizing glimpse at what looks to be another incredible game in the Xenoblade series. With only a 2-minute trailer and a short statement from the developers, this game has immediately shot up to the status of being my most anticipated game, an impressive feat considering there's really good competition when it comes to games to be excited about right now. Xenoblade Chronicles 2 won me over in every sense imaginable, and I still hold it to be one of my top favorite games of all time. And of course, there's not much that hasn't been said about how incredible the first game is as well, and how groundbreaking it was for the modern JRPG genre. There are few developers I trust right now as much as Monolith Soft when it comes to dropping a truly incredible game that will keep you entertained with a thrilling story, great characters, and depth in its gameplay. I have absolute faith that Xenoblade 3 is going to be just as amazing as it seems to be, hence why my excitement levels are through the roof. And if you know anything about me or my channel, when something video game related excites me, I like to make a video about it. So here we are. Now, I could just incoherently gush about the trailer for 15 minutes, but I want to take this time instead to do a bit of theory crafting about both the story and the gameplay of this game, looking back at past entries to see what should be kept and what shouldn't return, alongside some wishlist type stuff that I would personally really like to see in the game. Fasten your seatbelts, Xenoblade fans, because the hype train has left the station, and we're in for one wild ride. Let's start out with some ideas about what the story of this game could look like, because boy, there's a lot to talk about here. Brief warning, I will be spoiling a good chunk of Xenoblade 1 and 2, so if you've decided to watch this for giggles and still plan on playing either of those, you might want to skip ahead to the gameplay section or, take the time and start playing now. Alright, first things first, we gotta talk about how this game is confirmed to be a culminating story of the first two games. Now, the first thing that comes to my mind is the fact that we already know of a connection between All Rest and the world of Bionis and Mechonis, as both of these worlds originated as a result of the experiments on the conduit performed by Klaus. So seeing these two worlds collide is totally within the realm of possibility, especially since the ending of each game prior was left somewhat ambiguous. We could either see the worlds merge as a result of the ending of either game, or we could be dealing with some weird dimension hopping stuff here. We did have characters from different games come into All Rest through the Challenge Mode DLC, but I'm pretty confident that that's not supposed to be canon, so, at least in my opinion, the most logical explanation here is that the events of Xenoblade 1 and 2 remove Klaus's influence from both worlds, allowing the two to become one world, which seems to be called Ionios. It seems like there are remnants of the Titans from each game as well, as we can see when the game's logo is revealed, which strengthens the idea of a merging of the worlds. So if that is the case, the next question is what kind of time gap takes place in between the events of the first two games and the event of the third game? Well, there's a few things we can look at in the trailer to try to get an idea of this, but there's nothing even close to conclusive. The natural first place to look is at our returning characters, Nia and Melia, or at least the people that look extremely similar to Nia and Melia. It's possible that these could be red herrings, but I'm pretty convinced that they're both the real deal. Problem is, both of these characters are anomalies when it comes to aging. High-Entia age at an extremely slow rate, and Flesh Eaters do age, but since Minoth survives the 500 years between Torna and base Xenoblade 2, it's safe to say that they age very slowly as well. This time gap most likely won't be some extremely long period of time, as neither of those characters look substantially older, but we could be looking at something up to like 300 years, just to throw a number out there. Safe to say, neither of those two are going to give us answers from looks alone, so let's look elsewhere. Hardcore fans most likely notice the older looking character about midway through the trailer, and how he both looks and sounds a lot like Vandam from Xenoblade 2. This raises like 20 questions because 1, Vandam was dead last we saw him, and 2, he doesn't look that much older. It's possible that he was revived when the world was reset at the end of 2, but regardless, I think the odds of this being Vandam himself are slim. Looking at the statement from Mr. Takahashi, he specifically states that this game will take players into the future, which would be a weird thing to say if this game was only a few years after the others. This character could be an older Zeke, judging solely by the eye patch, but it doesn't exactly make sense that Zeke would be this old, and Nia would still look relatively young since Zeke is a Blade Eater with a similar lifespan. So what gives then? I think we could be dealing with ancestors of well-known characters. Not only do I think that this Vandam lookalike could be an ancestor, but I have a strong feeling that Mio, who is confirmed to be a protagonist, is an ancestor of Nia. I'm well aware that she could be an unrelated Gormott or Gormott-like equivalent of this new world, but the similarities between her and Nia are too striking to be a coincidence. The gem in her chest that looks somewhat like a core crystal is an interesting detail that adds to this theory as well. Who knows if a Flesh Eater could have a child? The intricacies of childbirth in the Xenoblade world have not been discussed in great detail yet, although that might be for the best. So my current theory is that Xenoblade 3 takes place some 100 years after the first two, and features descendants of Nia and Vandam, along with others that we haven't seen yet, or some that might be less obvious. This leads me to another question. Who are the two nations of this new world, Keves and Agnes, and why are they fighting? In looking at the characters that are on each side of this conflict, I noticed that there seems to be somewhat of a divide between the characters that look like they would originate from Xenoblade 1's world, and the characters that look like they came from 2's. Of course, we have Melia and Nia as the leaders of these two factions. That's one from each game right there, but it goes deeper than that. The new Hyentia character, Uni, is from Keves, as well as Lance, who appears to be a Machina. It seems to me like the people of Bionis merged with the people of Mechonis to create Keves. It looks like Melia and the rest of the Hyentia took up a leadership position, and the traditional Hyentia look was merged with the look of Mechonis as a result, which is why Keves is described as having a mech style. On the other side, we have Mio, who looks Gormott, as I stated before, alongside other Agnes people wearing clothing reminiscent of what you would see in the Praetorium. It's interesting that Agnes are known for their use of ether, as it was also commonly used by people on the Bionis, but it's possible that this was a decision made to separate the two factions aesthetically. If I'm right, and the place of origin is what divides these two nations, it's entirely possible that the merging of the two worlds was not harmonious, and each world saw the other as an intruder. This war could have been going on since around when the worlds merged, but we have no way of knowing until we get more info. Another point I've seen floating around the internet is that these two factions may be fighting over differing perspectives on Klaus, as the people from Xenoblade 1's world would look upon his actions with a lot more disdain than the people of Allrest would, considering his role in Allrest was much less violent. I see this as being a plausible reason for conflict, as a lot of conflict in Xeno games tends to be religiously motivated. Speaking of Klaus, we have absolutely no idea who the villain of this game could be. Neither Keves or Agnes appears to be portrayed as the good one or the evil one, since it looks like the main characters will hail from both nations and form somewhat of a neutral party. So I'm convinced there will be someone behind the scenes pulling the strings. I saw a tweet that pointed out that both Keves and Agnes translates to lamb in different languages. This draws parallels to Xenogears, which depicts a manufactured war. It could also be connected to the idea of a sacrificial lamb, two factions being sent to destroy each other for someone else's purpose. One line of dialogue in the trailer points toward this as well. Some unknown character says, "They're not your friends anymore, they're his fuel." We have no idea who he is, and the trailer doesn't exactly show anyone that could fill this role. Clearly someone is using the people of one or both of the nations to fuel himself, which seems like a big red flag pointing to our villain, whoever it may be. We could see Zanza return, though I would think that that would be a bit disappointing. One final theory, this one's totally out there. The villain of the game could be a power-hungry Shulk. Given that he was a god at one point, he could be immortal. It would be extremely interesting, albeit very tragic, to see him become the villain after being the world's hero. The story of Xenoblade Chronicles 3 could go in a million different directions. The knowledge that the previous two games are linked to this one makes theorizing 10 times more interesting. I can't wait to see what everyone else thinks is going to happen, and I can't wait to find out what actually happens for myself. This game has the potential to be the best story in the Xenoblade series yet. Alright, that's enough story stuff. Let's get into some speculation about what the gameplay might look like. This section will most likely be even more speculative than the story section was, because even though we do see gameplay, it's just the kind of wander around explory type stuff that's standard for the Xenoblade series. Unfortunately, we don't see anything from the UI or any scenes of combat to get a sense for either of those yet. The only thing of note to point out from the limited footage we saw was that traversal through the world might be a bit more dynamic than it was before. We see Mio grinding on a wire, and a scene where it looks like the party is riding in a boat. I have to imagine that these scenes are both signs of greater things to come. While it's never been a problem per se, the Xenoblade series doesn't offer much when it comes to fun ways to move through the world, aside from a fun slide section here and there. Maybe we could see cool contraptions like zip lines, or appearances of other land vehicles to ride around in that would be in line with the small amount we've seen so far. That's really all I can get out of the trailer in regards to gameplay, so let's hit the realm of pure speculation. When it comes to combat, there's no certainties for what could be present in Xenoblade 3, considering that the combat in 1 and 2 vary in many ways. Since Xenoblade 2 is a more recent entry, it would make sense for them to take ideas from that game, which would be totally okay by me. I actually made a video around a year ago breaking down the gameplay and why I love it so much. Link in the description if you want to watch it later, I promise it's good. So safe to say I'm a fan of how 2 did things, especially the battle system. The tricky part is that 2's battle system is almost entirely built around the blades, and I really don't see the blades returning. It seemed like a system that was pretty unique to that game, and besides, I don't see any blades running around with the party members. I do think blades will be in the game given the crossover aspect, but that won't be a factor in the gameplay. This means that as Xenoblade 2's combat system returns, it will need to be heavily modified. I do have an idea of something they could do to bridge this gap, however. One thing I really enjoyed about Xenoblade 2 was the amount of depth that each of your blades had. They all had their own affinity chart and fell into a weapon class and adapted its arts depending on which character was using them. I think we could keep this idea but shift over to the more traditional way RPG weapons are handled, as in they're actually weapons and not cute anime people. Weapons could work like they do in the original Xenoblade, where they are all bought at shops and found in chests, but rather than just being one and done, each weapon could have blade-like qualities, such as an affinity chart or skill tree or something. In fact, you could even make it that weapon classes aren't character-specific. Sure, each character would have their own signature weapon type, but if you allowed a character to wield more than one weapon at a time, then you could maintain the mix-and-match nature of blades without actually having blades. You could either have a character switch weapons mid-battle, or find some way to create one larger set of arts that you can customize based on the weapons you have equipped. These weapons could have elements assigned to them as well, much like blades did, which could help give each weapon a unique identity. On a different note, it would be nice to see the arts mapped to specific buttons again. Xenoblade 2 was definitely onto something with that. It made selecting arts way quicker than the horizontal menu, and I would not be surprised if that made a return. I'm also going to predict that auto-attacking will work more like 2 than 1, where you stop auto-attacking while moving, but ultimately it will depend on whether 3 will encourage a combat system based on moving a lot or being stationary. It'll be very interesting to see whether Xenoblade 3 takes inspiration from 1 or 2, or even if it does something totally unique. Only time will tell on that one. There are so many aspects that have the same state of limbo where they could repeat an old idea or come up with something completely new. Of course, this means that there's not much of a point of theorizing about them, but there still are a couple of gameplay related things to speculate about. The Torna DLC for Xenoblade 2 might be a good place to look for this stuff, as it added many quality of life changes. First, I think the inn system where you can freely adjust your level is here to stay. Not much of a reason why it wouldn't, but the way it's incorporated in Torna tells me Monolith plans to keep the system around. We could see the return of craftable items, but that depends on what kind of items the shops will sell. I also believe that we could see the return of something resembling the affinity chart. The fact that the idea was somewhat revisited in Torna in the form of the community system tells me Monolith wanted to reincorporate the system after its absence in 2's base game. I just hope we see some serious changes, as there wasn't too much to get excited about when it came to the community system. Then there's the talent arts that were introduced in Torna. These unique abilities each character had never felt as fleshed out as they could be, and the games didn't place much importance on them. They could be making a return in Xenoblade 3, and their purpose in Torna was testing them for a bigger use in the future. I'm not actually sure how long Xenoblade 3 has been in development, but if they were working on it in Torna at the same time, it could explain some of the elements of Torna that were introduced but never hit their full potential. I certainly hope so, as these were all ideas that helped spice up Xenoblade 2's formula, and certainly could do the same for 3. That's all the ideas I have that at least have a little bit of logic behind them. Now I want to hit upon some miscellaneous ideas that I have that I'd love to see in the game without much reasoning. Let's call it my Xenoblade 3 wish list. Most importantly, I want to see the tutorial problem addressed. Adding a tutorial menu in Torna was a good start, but I want to see tutorials that actually communicate how the game works as clearly as possible. So many people were turned off from Xenoblade 2 because they couldn't figure it out, and even though it was better, Xenoblade 1 wasn't perfect either. Next, I would love to see the affinity chart and Collectopedia return from Xenoblade 1. These were two things that the first game had that I really wanted to see in 2. I touched on the affinity chart thing earlier, but I wanted to clarify that I want it back in its full glory. Show all the connection between the townspeople and the characters and quests again. It was truly one of the most interesting things in Xenoblade 1. Speaking of Xenoblade 1, customizable outfits would be a fun thing to see return. It always made for some ridiculous scenes in the original, but allowing the player to set different outfits for appearance and stats in Definitive Edition really seemed to fix this problem. There's actually a bit of precedent that this could happen, since a couple characters have slight outfit changes throughout the trailer. I'm not quite convinced that this signifies anything though, but I'll be happy to prove wrong if that's the case. Moving on, we saw the boat in the trailer that I commented on, but I really hope that that's not the only form of transportation. Give us some cool stuff to ride on. Whether it's wildlife or some sort of technology, having additional movement options could really elevate the exploration in this game to the next level. Here's an oddly specific one. I really hope they nail the right balance of giving out experience points. I feel like Xenoblade 2 was really good at this. I never found myself grinding at any point in the game, yet I still find myself having to grind a bit here and there playing the first game. Being able to scale down your level means that you can't get overpowered on accident, so I'm hopeful that this wish could be fulfilled. Lastly, even though I praise Xenoblade 2 so much, I do want to see this game try all sorts of new things. Part of what made Xenoblade 2 so interesting was that it added so many unique ideas that were nowhere to be found in Xenoblade 1, so I hope to be able to say the same about 3. It would be a bit anticlimactic if the game just reflected its predecessors in every way, but I'm confident that that won't be a problem. In the end, the most exciting aspects are the aspects that we can't even begin to theorize about. I can't wait. And with that, that's all my thoughts about Xenoblade 3 in a nutshell. Well, not actually sure if they'd all fit in a nutshell. Maybe a clamshell. Regardless, I hope you were entertained by some of the ideas I threw out in this video. It'll be really fun to see what I got right and wrong when the game comes out later this year. I would love to hear in the comments if you have one theory of mine that stood out to you. Let's get a conversation going. And, you could talk about one thing that I'm totally wrong on, too. I think I can take it. Again, super excited to see more from Xenoblade 3. You'll definitely see me talking about the game again on this channel. If you like seeing people make videos about Xenoblade, then please suggest tapping that subscribe button in a non-aggressive manner so you can see stuff like this in the future. Don't worry, I definitely won't clog up your sub box, so if that was what was stopping you, I can assure you that that will not be an issue. As for people who may be fans of my other content, I was actually midway through working on the Every Song Ranked video for the original World Ends With You, but I got way too excited about Xenoblade and decided to get this vid out first, so back to that, I guess. Catch you later, everybody.